The verdict is in, everybody. Justin Trudeau has finally been busted for contributing to espionage. There's a very high-end government lab in Winnipeg that Justin Trudeau oversees. It's the government lab, okay? And it holds all of Canada's most severe viruses. I know we're getting back into that territory. Well, it turns out that Justin Trudeau allowed members of the communist regime of China to work there and to transfer information back to China. And this happened just before the last snap election that Justin Trudeau called in order to secure his candidacy until the next federally scheduled election. It's this whole massive scandal that's happening right now. I'm sure you're aware of it. Let's take a look at this House of Commons footage that the Conservatives are blasting Justin Trudeau for his incompetence. This isn't just some small little scandal. This is treason. Treasonous at the highest level. It's not the Conservatives that are calling it treason. It's CSIS, Canada's highest form of security. It's basically the FBI or the NSA saying, oh yeah, this is horrible, horrible, and Trudeau needs to be held accountable. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Before we get into it, I want to encourage everyone to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. We're on route to 100,000 subscribers. If you don't want to subscribe for me, do it because the government really doesn't want you to. Without further ado, here's the video.
The Canada-China Committee in 2019 could have done exactly the same job as the ad hoc committee did, and we could have had the documents 3 years ago. The CSIS assessments released yesterday make it clear the PRC is and was actively recruiting top Canadian scientists to plunder Canada's research and intellectual property. The assessments also make clear that the PRC wants to weaponize this civilian research for military purposes against us and our allies. Knowing what we know now, will the government halt all collaboration between the Winnipeg National Microbiology Laboratory and any entities and individuals in the People's Republic of China?
The Honourable Minister for Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that an attack on our national security by foreign nations, be it China or Russia, represents an attack on democracy.
Attack on democracy, like someone hacking the stream? What just happened?
To plunder Canada's research. Oh, now, will the
Honourable Minister for Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that an attack on our national security by foreign nations, be it China or Russia, represents an attack on democracy and represents a direct attack on every member of this House. And that I share his outrage that China or any country would attempt to interfere in our process. The Public Health Agency, which is one of the most respected agencies in the world, hired 2 Canadian citizens who are eminent and well-known scientists in Canada who lied. It is the Public Health Agency that discovered that. It is the Public Health Agency that fired them, and that's why there's now an RCMP investigation about their actions.
The Honourable Member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
The documents, Mr. Speaker, reveal a shocking disregard for Canada's national security. They reveal a government that is completely asleep at the switch on national security and the machinery of government. They reveal government employees collaborating with Beijing's government and with the biological weapons unit of the People's Liberation Army. Equally shocking are the health minister's comments. He said yesterday, there was no evidence of actual breaches at the lab and no sensitive information actually left the country. The documents say otherwise. Does the minister stand by those comments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the 2 Canadian scientists in question were well known for their work in virology and had spent their time working on health treatments for those that were suffering from viruses. They are collaboration. There is absolutely no evidence of the thing that the member opposite is suggesting, and I do not think that it is at all appropriate to suggest that they were involved with weaponization or things of this nature. They have all the documents, they can see all the information. We have waived all the normal considerations, not only of national security, Mr. Speaker, but of employee relationships that normally are kept confidential. It was our government that did that. That's why they have this information.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland, Colchester.
Speaker, scientists working with Ebola at Canada's only Level 4 lab collaborated with the People's Republic of China Army Major General. Sadly, this story does not end there. Dr. Chu was able to gain access to the lab for students from China, and it gets worse. A scientist from the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, the research arm of the PLA, known to work on biology-enabled warfare. How did so many citizens from a hostile superpower gain access to Canada's top lab? Is it because the Prime Minister admires China's basic dictatorship?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Some will attempt in national security concerns to play partisan games. I think that's unfortunate. And let me just give an example. With respect to Ebola, the exchange of Ebola in 2019 was done in the context of trying to work with China and other countries on finding solutions to Ebola, which exists in so many different parts of the country. At that moment in time in 2019, the relationship with China was in a different place. The information that was shared was through legitimate channels. It has nothing to do with this issue. It was absolutely known and handled with complete control. I think it's very, very important to not mischaracterize national security for partisan interest.
I'd like to remind all members to ensure that they don't use language which would be unparliamentary.
Unparliamentary. Buddy, you're unparliamentary.
Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, that minister's comments are reckless and untrue. Before March 31st, 2019, the PRC did not have a containment level 4 lab. How can I be so specific about the date? This is the date on which a scientist at Canada's top lab, the National Microbiology Lab, shipped dangerous pathogens, including Ebola virus, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This scientist had a history of visiting and collaborating with the PLA since 2016. When did the Minister of Health and the Prime Minister know about the espionage and blatant violation of our sovereignty, and when did they decide to cover it up?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
The exact opposite of a cover-up occurred. It's actually this government that created the process that released these documents. So they actually refused to participate in this process. The second thing that I will say, Mr. Speaker, with respect to our national security interests, that it is essential when we're dealing with national security to recognize two things. That the party opposite is saying that they would support a partisan interference in the Public Health Agency of Canada, that if they were in government, they would see it as acceptable for political interference into that process. No, it's at an arm's length, and rightfully it is at an arm's length. They are the ones that identified these Canadian citizens, these eminent scientists, were lying, and they took action.
Needs to be some jail time for somebody.
Order. Colleagues.
This is going to get heated.
This Prime Minister isn't worth the cost, the crime, the corruption, or the cover-ups. After hiding the Winnipeg lab documents from Canadians for over 3 years, we finally know why the Liberals blocked Parliament. We know that Dr. Chu had close and clandestine relationships with entities of the People's Republic of China and collaborated with military scientists. The People's Liberation Army is a known security threat to Canada.
That's right.
So why did the Prime Minister cover up this breach of national security instead of arresting these spies?
Good question.
There you go, man.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, I'll answer the first part of the question, as I suspect they're going to have other questions on the second element. On the first order, it was the first offer was to have all parliamentarians look at the documents through NSICOP. That was an immediate offer. Some opposition members said that wasn't a good answer because they wanted to make sure that if there was a need for redactions to be released, they wanted a process. So I, as House Leader at that point in time, suggested an ad hoc process that would ensure that an independent arbiter would make the decision about releasing those documents. I would remind the member again that it is an independent decision of the Public Health Agency to make redactions. I'm sure he's not suggesting that anything else other than that should happen.
The Honourable Member from Selkirk Interlake.
That House Leader actually sued the Speaker. Dr. Chu maliciously shared technology and materials from the Winnipeg labs with Major General Chen, one of Beijing's top commanders at the Academy of Military Medical Science. The Academy is described in the CSIS documents as the highest medical research institution of the People's Liberation Army of the PRC and has offensive biological weapons capabilities. And one of its objectives is to transform the results of basic civilian research into military applications and biotechnologies. The Chinese military can now make more biological weapons and potentially use them against Canadians and our allies. Why did the Prime Minister cover up this national security threat?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I've already said that the documents first were released and then the additional redactions were actually commenced by us. The second point is when the member says maliciously, we don't know what their intention was. That's the purpose of an RCMP investigation. Secondly, these are individuals that I am deeply concerned about, like the member opposite. And in a process of due process, we understand what they did. With respect to the Chinese government, the military and the government and academia and scientists are all part of their military. That means that any connection that they had whatsoever would have touched that. And so I think it's careful not to
That is rich.
Colleagues, it's hard to hear, for the chair, to hear the response. If members are not satisfied with the response, sometimes the best opportunity is just to listen to it in silence and let it stand on its own. The honourable member from Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
The health minister should actually read the CSIS documents. It actually describes all the breaches that were done and the espionage that was carried out. At the Prime Minister's top public health labs in Canada, Beijing military scientist Dr. Yan was given unfettered access to all the labs and the computer systems at the Winnipeg labs, which were covertly shared by Dr. Chu with Beijing. Instead of stopping this espionage, the Prime Minister decided to cover it up. Why did the Prime Minister put his admiration for the basic dictatorship of the Communist Party in Beijing ahead of the public safety of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to step back and really consider what the Conservative Party is saying here. That at the time in which they were hired, these two Canadian citizens were eminent scientists who were well published and well regarded throughout North America. The fact that they lied and misrepresented themselves, Mr. Speaker, is reprehensible.
Colleagues, I'm going to ask members, please. I'll ask the member from Miramichi Grand Lakes, please, to keep his comments to himself until he will have the floor at the time that he asks a question. The Honourable Minister of Health has 15 seconds left on the clock.
So I would hope what they're not suggesting is that if they were in power, that they would have interfered politically, been able through clairvoyance to know that these eminent scientists who at this point in time had no reason to believe that they were anything other than Canadian scientists who were doing good research, that they would have interfered politically with clairvoyance and got rid of them before this happened.
Okay with spies, I guess.
After 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister isn't worth the cost or the cover-up. For 3 years, this Prime Minister covered up a terrifying national security breach at Canada's highest security lab, hiding the fact that the head of special pathogens was actively collaborating with top Beijing military scientists engaged in biodefense and bioterrorism. So, in the face of that, will the Prime Minister accept responsibility for this colossal failure on his watch?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question on numerous occasions, but let me address the preposition at the start of that question, where he says the working together with another political party. He doesn't want to do that, and I get that. He's used to making partisan points and not reaching across the aisle and collaborating. But you know what happens when you collaborate, Mr. Speaker, when you work together? You get national pharmacare. You get the ability to say to those that have diabetes that you've got your back and you've got medication. You say to women, we're going to give you real freedom, freedom over your sexuality, freedom over your reproductive rights. That's what happens when you stop focusing on partisan politics and you start focusing on results.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton, St. Albert, Edmonton.
What a disgraceful answer from this minister. The national security culture begins at the top with the Prime Minister. This is a Prime Minister who said that he admires Beijing's basic dictatorship. This is a Prime Minister who, over the past 8 years, has repeatedly ignored Beijing's interference. So, in the face of that, is it any wonder that under this Prime Minister's watch, top Beijing military scientists had unfettered access to some of Canada's most sensitive biological secrets?
There you go. Watch Holland pop a blood vessel.
Speaker, in the first order, that isn't true. What is true is that the Public Health Agency of Canada, which is one of the most respected agencies in the world, that was there for us throughout the pandemic,
nice tide. Is it coming to men's?
Responsible for its operations. And the truth is, there were two individuals hired. They were Canadian citizens, eminent scientists, well known and well respected across Canada, and indeed around the world, who lied to the Public Health Agency of Canada. The Public Health Agency of Canada then took the very responsible action of firing those individuals, turning the matter over to the RCMP, where they currently are under investigation, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, where are they?
That was an L answer.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton, had the opportunity to ask 2 questions. I'm certain he could speak to his House leader to ask more questions in the House. But until that time, please, I'd ask him to wait his turn until he has the microphone, until he has the floor. The honourable member from Lennox, Addington.
Speaker, evidence speaks otherwise. After 8 years,
Shouldn't even wait for the House Speaker to finish.
The cost nor the cover-up. He can't be trusted to keep our people safe. Yesterday, the entire nation was shocked to learn that this government granted 2 People's Liberation Army assets full access to secret research in a top-secret Canadian lab. This represents the biggest security breach since the Cold War. And this happened under a Prime Minister who famously said he admires China's basic dictatorship. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians trust a Prime Minister that fails to take national security seriously?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the representations made by the member are inaccurate, and I would invite people to read the documents, which have been fully redacted.
ChatGPT answer.
Mr. Speaker, between a party that is focused on partisanship and difference, the member opposite talks about working with another party and what that might accomplish. What about dental care, Mr. Speaker? When we focused on cooperation, we were able to get dental care done.
We can jump into dumpsters to get our food, and then when we chip our teeth, we can get them fixed for free.
Seniors will have access to dental care. They're voting against that. They're against that. Are they against pharmacare? Are they against the other fruits of cooperation that come from...
We can't eat, but we'll have nice teeth.
Calgary.
Calgary? Come on, Mr. Speaker. You got one job, bro.
Colleagues. Again, colleagues, it is very important for us, for those of us who have the ability to speak both languages, it's a clear advantage of being in the House that we don't require the use of the headsets. But for those of us who do require it, it's very difficult for them to hear the questions or the answers if there's too much noise in the House.
Bro, there ain't no answers.
Out of respect to all their colleagues and each of your respective
the comments that have just been directed towards me seem highly inaccurate.
And to the questions.
Okay,
so
robot.
Those of us who require the use of earphones can do so.